well, the big thing that I wanted to talk about today was ransomware, right? From the perspective of application security, right? Like, let me post up this link. So just in June alone, right? What is this? Bleeping Computer or something like that, right? These guys have compiled a list of, okay, well, the last week, right? The fact that they have an article that's called "This Week in Ransomware" should tell you how many attacks are happening right now, right? We're talking oil pipeline stuff, Colonial. We're talking our evil attack against JBS. They call it a couple more. There's Fujifilm, U.S. nuclear weapons contractor, right? Like all of these ransomware attacks have happened within the last couple of weeks, right? Computer memory maker, AData, right? There's a new service that's out. They're calling out some of the other services that are there, how much JBS paid out, food suppliers. Dang, man. Like you just look through that
as a service. Yep. That's a thing.
Yeah. I mean, you knew it would be, right? Like there's always been the malware as a service providers in, Russia, China, like affiliations. They've got customers that come to them and they basically, exploit things. And then you want a ransomware, here's a list of computers we have exploits on, and like people target it. It's a crazy, crazy industry, right?
Larry said when ransomware gets as much time as the weather on nightly news, things have gone sideways. Absolutely. What's sad too is like, well, I don't feel that bad for a pipeline CEO, but I'm not going to shed a tear for a pipeline CEO. Anyways, oil pipeline, but I watched the Colonial Pipeline CEO on the news and it was just like, oh my gosh, talking about the decision to, pay the ransomware, which sounds like it was pretty much recovered anyways. Yeah, it was just brutal to watch. It was like, so you could tell he was just so nervous giving that, being like, I had to make the decision, and it impacts the East Coast. And also this was interesting too. I don't know if you caught this, but he made sure in the speech to mention the FBI had said, don't pay the ransom, obviously, because that's our official policy. But having said all that, come on, most of the ransomware was recovered, or the payout was recovered. Wouldn't that be exactly what you would say? I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot under the hood there going on behind the scenes, which is going to be an amazing story someday, but if released. But yeah, I'd imagine what we heard, what we were told, and what happened are probably very different things. So, but it was weird to watch.
And so that's where I wanted to go with this, is from a defender side of things, and especially you, Ken, working in an organization, like what is like the appetite from management or from like the C-suite on ransomware, and what are you guys doing to protect yourself from that?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I
know it's a lot. We'll get into like some of the onesie twosie things that application security or product security people can do. But just in general, from an organization perspective, like what is the buzz?
I don't know our C-suite's position on it. I hope I never find out our C-suite's position on it as well. I hope I never have to be, none of us have to be forced to figure out that. But I think, obviously there's lots of like endpoint detection, a lot of monitoring in place. These things help. But I guess I don't know, how often is this like a target of opportunity versus a target of like it was a target, right? And they finally got in, which is like always possible. You can always phish somebody. You can always do, like where there's the absence of technical protection, there's always the presence of human error, right? So even in the most secure technically environment, technically speaking, you there's probably a way to get in. That's the way that I like to. I think most of us think. In terms of like, what is it ransoming, right? Like, what is the type of data that we're talking about. Like redundancy, because some of these I think are just like they lock you out of your own access to data, and without redundancy, that's a bit difficult to deal with. In other cases, I have to look at the other cases. I would imagine we're talking about wholesale takeovers of the most important vital bits of systems. Again, like it's a little hard for me to know exactly what the ransomware and this is not my expertise for sure. So I feel very much out of my depth here, and I'll just admit that. But I would say, especially when it comes to critical services like hospitals and pipelines and things like that, it would be pretty hard not to just say, look, we're going to pay this ransomware, especially like the amount that they were asking. When you look at the numbers overall, it's actually really a relatively small numbers, even though it's big wins for these ransomware attackers. It's relatively small numbers for the people they're attacking usually. Again, not my expertise, so if that's incorrect, but according to what I'm looking at, the targets and the payouts, that seems to be true. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess the thing I would say is like, sometimes it has to be paid out, and then you have to just get, to go back and try and figure out how it happened, and deal with that and put in protections in place, and just kind of bite the bullet. It happens, especially with healthcare. I think that's the one that when I first started seeing in the news, it was healthcare. It was like hospitals and like people with serious ramifications for when things just don't work and they don't have access to data or systems. Like I said, I hope we never find out what our policy is on that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is the interesting thing with ransomware in general, right? Is there's all these components. Like we always talk about the different like software supply chain attacks, dependencies, how that can insert code into your application, and I don't think there's been evidence of ransomware coming in through those avenues yet, right? Yet. Because they do target, they send out phishing emails, they send out, there's other easier avenues right now. But the protections that we start to talk about preventing code and, untrusted data coming into your environment and into your application is where this all starts. Right. It's education at some level of, okay, who has access to what do they click on? Like, how do you keep yourself secure? But when it comes to an application, Ken, you jumped onto redundancy pretty quickly, right? From how do I protect against ransomware so in my application, right? If we're just looking at an application solely from that lens, I go back to that, confidentiality, integrity, availability, the CIA triad. And this is a combination of integrity and availability that we're looking at. It is an attack against the integrity of the data, like what it is that you're actually doing, the functionality that exists there. And then the availability is what they're taking advantage of because they're conducting a denial of service attack against your application through the integrity exploit. Right. So Ken, you talked about redundancy, right? That's one of the main avenues that organizations look at for preventing ransomware attacks. So that if someone does get in, you just inevitably assume that eventually someone's going to click on a link, that they're going to encrypt this data on a file share. And you've got to be able to, number one, identify that. And number two, restore it to a known good point before the encryption happened, right? Those are the two principles, I guess, of preventing ransomware or dealing with ransomware if it's already made it in through the front door. Unless you're doing that in your application, right? All bets are off, and you're gonna end up having to pay that fee.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, when like, I don't know, just say early, like pre-2010, right, and even a little bit after. But like definitely I can speak to from 2002 to 2010. We'll say there was a lot of emphasis on, well, and before 2002, I can just speak to the roughly 2001, 2002 to 2010 timeframe. There was a lot of emphasis on hardening the perimeter, but right, like we found that was the worst strategy, because then people are just like soft, crunchy, inside. You could just like if you get in like through phishing or whatever, which is likely, someone makes a mistake, which is likely, in like a config or something, I'm saying, or put something online they shouldn't have, whatever. And you get in, it was like a free for all, right? And there was kind of this assumption of like, if we harden at the perimeter, then like that's our valiant effort, and let's just hope nothing happens. And then over time, post 2010, as like, I guess through like RSA and all the like conferences that the C-suite kind of go to, what we had been saying at like hobbyist conferences started to surface its way up, started to change the industry. And like when I say we, I just mean as security practitioners, we'd been emphasizing like, you shouldn't just try and harden the perimeter. You should actually do the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but you should assume that there's going to be a problem, and you should run tabletop exercises, have redundancy in place, all the things that we talk about. So instead of just relying on your perimeter security, which is arguably, as important as all of the other pieces like internal hardening, and like we said, redundancy, and having a response plan, and having tooling and detection, and knowing what to do. And also just like that idea of just assuming that you'll be breached and then work backwards from there. Again, I think we talked about this. We mentioned the concept of a pre-mortem instead of a post-mortem, just pretending that something went wrong and going backwards from there. This is the same concept. Just assume that you're breached and then work backwards from there. How bad would it be if like the worst thing that you could imagine happened? And how would you deal with that?
Yep.
And I think that's the tone that has been set for this last decade, and hopefully, like for the upcoming decade, we have even better, more improved guidance. But yeah, that's long and short of it.